Olin, and salutations to the Truth Core once again. Recently, in one of the talks on healing the gender rift, I referred to a practice in planetary Tantra based on the instruction of the 5-skull crown. And I'd like to return to that right now, just for a moment, to offer some direction on how to behave in the world in the immediate future during this turn of events, in which it appears that the Soviet psyop is fading, or more likely has been deliberately geared down so that another psyop can come into play. So when I mentioned it, I described the 5-skull crown and physically what it looks like. It's a feature in the iconography of Tibetan Buddhism, and you'll see it on the thumbnail. And I said at that time, and I'll repeat, that I'm not here to explain all the 5 aspects of the crown. That would be to give the complete instruction, and I would not do that on the internet in a recorded talk. So I'm only going to talk about one of the skulls this time. I talked about 3 of them before. Remember that the structure of the crown is worn across your forehead. So the largest of the 5, the central skull, is right above your nose on your forehead. 2 other skulls are over your eyes, and then 2 others go over your ears. And I identified the skull over the left ear as, let's say, the voice of guilt, and the skull over your right ear as the voice of shame. Now I'm going to talk about the central skull, because this is relevant to moving ahead in the world drama to the point where the drama really turns and goes into an entirely new direction. That is to say, he could do that with your participation. I don't predict that it will happen, but I say the opportunity for it to happen comes now, and that's why I'm here providing direction. You know, there's a saying in planetary Tantra, the fate of the world drama turns on one life at a time. According to the way this divine experiment is set up, one individual, one human animal at any moment, at any second, can determine the fate of the world drama in its entirety. Reflect on that. So, here's a little exercise of imagination that might engage you. Suppose that the next time you go out in public, could also do it in a family or community situation or at work, but let's say you're out in public and you picture yourself wearing the 5-skull crown. And you picture everyone else you meet wearing the archontic VR headset, just like the one illustrated in Zuckerberg's promotion for Meta. So it actually goes across the forehead and across the eyes and goes around both sides of the face and covers the ears. So those among us who are in the capture of the archontic deceit are wearing that headset, and you, by contrast, are wearing the 5-skull crown. So what happens now? Well, first of all, you recognize that you don't behave or respond or express yourself in the same way as those zombies who are wearing the archontic headset. They are under the power of the rulers or authorities. They have surrendered their sovereign will and intention, and also their basic wisdom. Remember, your divine parents are wisdom and intentionality. And they've surrendered the gifts of our divine parents, and they are living and acting in a remote control system. But you stand before them as a sovereign individual wearing the five-skull crown. So in the first place, let's talk about the two skulls that are on each side, on your ears. Everyone hears voices, an inner voice that says, that was shameful, or don't do that, it's shameful. And everyone hears another voice that says, you're guilty, which is a corrupt word. The voice really says, the voice from the crown says, you're responsible, take responsibility, you did that, admit it, and do what you can to make things right. So these two voices, these two channels of transmission in the human psyche are constantly operating according to the way we're designed, and they're natural, normal, and healthy and necessary to act in the world as a sovereign being who does not intend harm to anyone except those who intend and commit harm, and who has the spirit of mutual aid, but with a strong critical faculty, because you have to know when it's appropriate to act in a friendly and compassionate way toward others, and when it's not. So these two voices are guiding voices, and the individual who's wearing the VR headset doesn't hear those voices coming out of their own consciousness. They operate on the shame that is put on them and the guilt that is put on them. For instance, consider in the Soviet PSYOP the massive effort to put guilt on people. That PSYOP had the intention of convincing people to be guilty for breathing and for being healthy. So there are many, many ways in which the archontic forces introduce what they call in the military voice-to-skull techniques in order to capture the human animal so that the human animal will act according to their grand scheme, which is a demented scheme of domination and racial supremacy. I'd say it's pretty obvious to intelligent people by now that the agenda of the technocrats at the WEF, with their stated intention to run society on IT, or what is called AI, archontic intelligence, requires that they entirely control people by imposing the frequencies of artificial intelligence upon human animals who are not designed to run on MS-DOS or Apple OS. You are designed to run on the natural intelligence of your species in coordination with the intelligence of the mother planet. Planetary Tantra is the method, the set of tools to achieve that coordination, you see. Now I'm going to bring your attention directly to the central crown, which is larger than the others and sits right on the forehead. As you may realize by now, every feature of the five-skull crown corresponds to a feature of the archontic VR headset. So what does that imply? It implies that on the headset, inside, in the design, there is a transmitting module that carries the overriding signal of the authorities. It's actually the place where the authorities transmit to those who are captured in their system. The authorities transmit to that human animal their own primary driving force, and they transfer it to the individual who wears the headset. What is the primary driving force of the authorities? Well, go again to the Gnostic intel. When the initiates of the mysteries explained the intrusion of the archons, they were careful to say, and this is a subtle point, I struggle with it myself sometimes, they're careful to say that you can't really attribute intention and free will to the archons in the way that you attribute it to a human animal. It's very tricky to use the word intention, but they did identify a driving force. They called it, or the name of it in Greek is phthonos, and that translates into the English word envy. Now it's important to make a distinction between envy and jealousy. You can be jealous of something, and in some respects, that's a natural human emotion, a natural human response. Some people, are more jealous than others. Some people are intensely jealous, and others, like myself, are almost entirely lacking in jealousy. But jealousy is natural. Jealousy is not necessarily something to be condemned. For instance, jealousy can be a factor in driving you to do better and to achieve something that you wouldn't otherwise do. But in the case of possessions, whether that possession be a car or a wife or a husband, jealousy often arises. And how does it work? Well, if you're jealous, you can feel that there is something you don't have that someone else has and you would like to have it, right? Basically, that's what it is. I'm jealous of my neighbor. I'm single and I'm jealous of my neighbor because he has a beautiful, desirable wife. However, jealousy does not lead the human animal to go to the individual who has something of which you are jealous and commit any harm or take it away, you see. So the motive to take away something that someone else has of which you are jealous, or even to destroy that so they can't have it because you don't have it, or even to destroy them so that they can't have it, that goes beyond jealousy. Jealousy does not go there. Jealousy does not drive human beings to that sort of behavior, but envy does. Envy is the emotion, toxic, corrosive emotion, that drives people to destroy what they cannot have and even what they cannot be, what they cannot become. So the archons are driven by envy, so the Gnostics taught, simply because, as the narrative explains, they cannot be us. They cannot be like us. They attempt to make us like them, referring to what I said earlier. They attempt to turn us into zombies and cyborgs, but they cannot be or become like us. Hence, they operate from envy. And primarily, they are driven to destroy what they cannot have. Now, there are many levels in the pyramid of power on Earth today, from the command and control level, which is the directorate, all the way down to the dupes and the helpful idiots and the zombies on the street who actually enforce the agenda of the highest echelons of authority. And all through that pyramid, at all levels, the same force is operating, which is the force of envy. Someone who is not free and envies someone who is free and acts that way and shows it, may wish to destroy the person who is free because they can't be free. We saw this behavior operating a lot in the 2 years of the COVID PSYOP. Okay, I don't want to go on elaborating too much. I just want to get to the key point. For each of the functions or emotions on the five-skull crown, there's a corresponding function and emotion on the VR headset. So as I just explained, someone wearing the headset acts from guilt in a completely different way than someone wearing the five-skull crown. So what is the central function or emotion? It is envy. But not just envy. I submit to you that you consider that this envy, which possesses the powers, possesses people like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, the head of the WEF, Satan Klaus, is actually a modality of hatred. So envy and hatred are practically identical. They are like Siamese twins joined in one body, and they must act together. So it's really hatred for humanity, for freedom, love, innocence, truth, goodness, that drives the authorities and everyone who serves them. And that envy operates as a tool, if you will, of their profound, insane, and inhumane hatred. Now, there is nothing equivalent, innately equivalent, in the human animal to this factor of envy. If you look at the other four emotional functions, you'll find that there is the toxic form, the archontified form, and then there is a purified or genuinely human form. I'm not saying what they are here. So the five-skull crown initiation teaches you about the transformation of these toxified, misdirected emotions into genuine human emotions. But it so happens that there is no counterpart to envy. A genuine human being, a sovereign being, with self-love, does not envy anyone or anything, does not wish to take away from anyone what they have or prevent them from having it. But the authorities do. For instance, have you heard the saying, "You will own nothing and you will be happy"? Well, that's an expression of envy and hatred coming from the authorities, you see? And it reveals that they are envious of what you have. They are envious that there are human beings who have happiness, family, security, healthy relationships, who earn a living and therefore acquire things in a genuine and honest way. They hate people who earn a living because they never earn a living. They always cheat and steal from other people. That's how the authorities operate. Look at the banking system. Look at the fractional reserve banking system. It's a perfect construction of their envy. They don't want to work. They do not work. They hate work. And they envy those who work. So this force of envy faces you nakedly all the time in the world due to the presence of the archonic influence. And how do you counter it? If there is no equivalent emotion in you as a genuine human animal, how do you counter envy? Do it with contempt. As a matter of fact, contempt is the supreme emotional response to everything that the authorities do and say. Everything. And you can apply contempt as a free and voluntary response in every instance where you confront the authorities, no matter at what level. When you do this, and when you learn to do this, it's very pleasurable, by the way, and very liberating. Then the central skull of the crown that you wear as a free and sovereign agent of life becomes like a directional beam. And you use that brilliant beam of contempt to cut through every situation where you confront the authorities, even at the most petty level. Contempt is really a wonderful feeling. There's a certain kind of elation you can feel when you hold contempt. You hold people in contempt. And there's a feeling of liberation. And at moments it's almost funny. And as a matter of fact, laughing and mockery are genuine expressions of contempt, and you can learn to use them freely when you confront the authorities. Now, I'm going to conclude. I want to add some comments based on personal experience, because no matter whether or not I'm talking to you about some of the highest initiations of planetary tantra, such as the five skull crown initiation, I have to talk about my experience. This is not theoretical or metaphysical or abstract. I've experienced and lived through all this, and at times it's appropriate for me to tell you my viewpoint. Of course, I could say a lot about that, because I actually am a man, a human animal, that holds an enormous amount of contempt. As a matter of fact, if I go back to my childhood, I go back to my earliest memories from the age of 4 onward. I remember then, even as a 4-year-old boy, that I experienced contempt. Of course, I couldn't put a name on the emotion, but I experienced contempt in many, many instances of interaction with people around me at that time. So for me personally, contempt operates on a default function. That means that basically I hold everyone in contempt from the first moment of encounter. That's especially true of strangers or anyone I meet out in public. Of course, people I know more closely, I've got to know them heart to heart, mind to mind. I realize that they are not worthy of contempt because they are not operating from envy. And so what I do at that point is I disable the contempt. But I always use it as my primary response. It's a factor in my primary response to everyone. And as a result of that, people who know me well would probably tell you this and laugh a lot about it, is that I present in interactions with people an attitude. It's subtle. I'm not gross about it. I don't gloat about it. But you can see in my gaze, you can see behind my eyes that I'm looking at them with contempt. And believe me, they know it. And this contempt is such a beautiful response because it clears the whole field of human interactions and reduces everything down to basics. And then from the basics, I construct my interactions with people depending on what they prove to me about themselves by the way that they behave. But I do not disable the contempt, which is held primarily in the eyes. I do not disable it until I have sufficient cause to do so. That is one way that you might also learn to use this powerful factor, the imperative value of contempt. And you may find, you certainly will find, if you're using it correctly, that it gives you a sense of freedom in many ways, but principally in this way. If you're standing in front of someone and beaming contempt upon them from the central skull in the middle of your forehead, you have no obligation or desire whatsoever to negotiate with them about anything or to discuss anything with them. The primary emotional behaviors that you will have from taking that stance, the stance of contempt, is that you will feel free in the face of someone who is not free, and the immediate spontaneous response is to laugh at them, to laugh in their faces, and to mock them, but never to argue or negotiate with them. You are free not to compromise in any way by making an attempt to reach them with contempt, and watch what happens. But I must add finally, don't be a ham actor. Don't be a bad actor. I never play out contempt. I won't say never. Sometimes I play it like a samurai blade, like a laser blade. But generally, even when I do that, I do so in an indifferent and mocking way. You don't indulge in contempt. It's too clean. It's too pure. You don't go around with some kind of expression, grotesque distortion of your face. You might have a little twisted smile, but you don't express contempt in a grotesque and blatant way. It's extremely subtle until it isn't. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.